Have you ever stopped to consider what might happen when you're no longer able to take care of yourself? It's a sobering thought, isn't it? Imagine growing older, surrounded by family and friends you've cherished your whole life, only to find yourself alone, abandoned, and without a helping hand to lean on. This is a painful reality that many of us will inevitably face, whether we want to admit it or not. As time goes by, our children, whom we raised with unwavering love and sacrifice, may grow distant, overwhelmed by their own busy lives, and begin to see us as a burden rather than the people who shaped their worlds. In today's discussion, we'll confront these harsh truths about aging head-on. We'll explore what it truly means to grow old with grace and dignity, without placing unnecessary weight on the shoulders of those we love most. How can we prepare ourselves for the realities of aging while maintaining our independence and ensuring that our final years are defined by peace and self-respect, rather than regret? Through this conversation, we'll dive into real-life stories of older adults who have faced these challenges and made tough decisions to preserve their dignity. From their journeys, we can learn valuable lessons about how to approach this stage of life. You'll gain insight into why family members may not always be able to provide the care we hope for, and how to accept this reality with strength and grace. Most importantly, we'll discuss actionable steps you can take to protect your autonomy and build a life where you age with pride, peace, and purpose. By the end of this discussion, you'll walk away with a renewed understanding of why independence is essential as we age and how the choices we make today can pave the way for a fulfilling life tomorrow. Whether it's developing self-sufficiency, letting go of unrealistic expectations, or redefining what it means to rely on others, the lessons shared here can transform the way you think about your golden years. If you're someone who wants to avoid the common mistakes that lead many elderly people to feel forgotten and undervalued, this conversation is for you. Together, let's work to ensure that your later years are filled with respect and meaning, rather than bitterness or sorrow. Before we dive in, let me remind you, if you're not already subscribed to this channel, I encourage you to do so now. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss out on the life-changing lessons we share here. Your support means the world to me, and it helps us keep spreading these important messages. If you enjoy this video, please consider liking and sharing it to help others benefit from the wisdom we're uncovering together. If this topic resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please comment 1 if you find this discussion valuable, or comment 0 if you think there's room for improvement. Your feedback is incredibly important to me, as it helps shape the content we create. Now, let's begin this journey together. Aging is a truth we all carry within us, even if we refuse to acknowledge it. No one is immune to the passage of time. One day, each of us will find ourselves looking in the mirror at a reflection of frailty, a body once strong now trembling with age, movement slowed, independence slipping through our fingers. The inevitability of growing old is not just humbling, it is profoundly sobering. Yet, so many of us choose to look away, as if denial could somehow pause the clock. But time marches on, and eventually, it brings us to that poignant reality we've witnessed in others. A stooped elderly man with deeply etched wrinkles, his hands quivering as he clutches a cane, his children distant, too preoccupied with their own lives to notice his quiet struggles. It's a painful thought to imagine, the very children we cradled in our arms, whose cries kept us awake at night, and whose happiness became our life's mission, might one day see us not as their beloved parents but as burdens. We devoted ourselves to them completely, sacrificing time, energy, and dreams to ensure their futures were bright. We taught them to walk, speak, and face the world with courage. Yet, in our twilight years, when roles reverse and we find ourselves needing care, we may be met with impatience or even indifference. It's a betrayal that stings so deeply it's hard to find words to describe it. How does one cope with the realization that the love you gave so freely could one day be seen as an obligation? Many older parents sit in quiet reflection, whispering sentiments like, "I gave my children everything. My youth, my strength, my heart." And it's true. When they were young, they depended on us entirely. We kept them safe from the cold of winter, ensured they never went hungry, and stayed awake through the night when they were sick. We were their protectors, their everything. But when the roles shift, when we reach out for the same care we once offered so selflessly, the response can feel like a hollow echo. What's more painful is the slow, almost imperceptible change in our children's perception of us. At first, it's subtle, a dismissive laugh when we offer advice, a busy schedule that leaves little time for visits. But soon, the dynamic changes entirely. They stop seeing us as wise guides and start treating us like we've lost our way. The once endless admiration in their eyes fades, replaced by impatience and condescension. We, who were once their heroes, are now viewed as relics of a bygone time. In the whirlwind of their adult lives, our children's priorities naturally shift. They juggle careers, parenthood, and relationships, and somewhere along the way, we fade into the background. What they don't realize is that as we age, their distance doesn't just feel physical, it cuts emotionally. The pain of being forgotten or treated as an afterthought is a quiet agony that many elderly parents carry. And when illness strikes, forcing us to depend on their help, their frustration often seeps through, whether in their words, their hurried tone, or the weary glances that linger too long. And so, many of us retreat. We stop asking for help, worried that our requests will be met with resentment. Some of us even forego professional care, fearing that society will judge us for relying on strangers. We cling to the hope that our children will remember the love we poured into them and step in willingly. But hope, as tender as it is, often meets the harsh reality of life's relentless pace. As I reflect on this cycle of life, I can't help but feel the ache of unspoken truths. Aging is not just about losing strength or independence. It's about navigating the heartache of being needed less, of watching the love you gave become a chore for those who once depended on it. It's about learning to find grace in loneliness and acceptance in the moments when the world moves on without you. And yet, even in this reality, I believe there's still beauty. Perhaps the answer lies not in expecting others to care for us as we once cared for them, but in finding peace within ourselves. Perhaps the true gift of aging is learning to love ourselves as fiercely as we once loved others, to cherish the time we have left, and to embrace the quiet dignity of letting go. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. Of course, most children won't openly admit it. Society's expectations and ingrained moral codes keep their true thoughts locked away, buried beneath rehearsed smiles and measured words. Yet as parents, we sense it. We feel it in the tension that lingers in their brief visits. We see it in the sharpness of their tone, in the rushed conversations that never delve too deep. And this unspoken truth lands like a weight on our hearts. It's a shattering realization. The bond you nurtured with unwavering love, the sacrifices you made, have somehow unraveled, tugged apart by the relentless passage of time and shifting priorities. And in the silence of your thoughts, the questions start to echo. Was this always going to happen? Is this just the natural course of life? I remember sitting with a group of older adults at a local senior center, discussing these very fears. We were from different backgrounds, teachers, business owners, homemakers, but we shared one thing in common: the desire not to become a burden. The room carried an unspoken vulnerability, as if we were all exposing a tender part of ourselves to people who would understand. The conversation naturally turned to the challenge of aging with dignity and independence, and the ways we could reclaim control over our own lives. One voice stood out: Mary, a retired teacher with a calm but determined demeanor. She spoke with a trace of sadness. "What I fear most isn't dying," she confessed, "but losing control over my life. I've seen it happen so many times. Older people being treated like children, being told where to live, what to eat, and even how to think. I won't let that happen to me." Her words resonated deeply. The nods around the table were unanimous. Frank, a proud former small business owner in his early 80s, added with a spark of defiance, "My kids think they're helping, but I've spent my whole life making my own decisions. I'm not about to let anyone take that away from me. Not now, not ever." His voice cracked slightly, though he tried to mask it with a chuckle. Beneath his words was a longing for respect, a plea to be seen not as a frail old man but as the capable, self-reliant person he had always been. I listened to these stories and felt my fears mirrored back at me. Their voices carried the weight of years. Years filled with joys, triumphs, and heartbreaks. One thing became clear: to age gracefully is not merely about avoiding financial dependence or staying physically healthy. It is about preserving the very essence of who we are, the identities we've worked so hard to build over a lifetime. Among the group, there was Mr. Charles, who made a pragmatic choice. "I've decided to move into a nursing home," he said quietly. "My pension covers it, and while it's not ideal, at least I won't feel like I'm imposing on my kids. At this age, it's not about how long I live anymore. It's about living with some dignity." His words lingered in the air, heavy with resignation. Mr. Robert, on the other hand, stood his ground. "Not me," he said firmly. "I'm staying right here in my home. If my kids can't care for me, I'll hire someone who can. I've saved enough to ensure I'll never have to rely on anyone but myself." His resolve was admirable, though I wondered if it was tinged with loneliness. Then there was Mr. Thomas, whose plan reflected a more traditional view. "I have 2 sons," he said. "I'll alternate between their homes. Whoever takes me in gets my pension," but his voice wavered, betraying the uncertainty behind his words. The months that followed revealed the stark realities of their choices. Mr. Charles moved into the nursing home and was met with the cold indifference of institutional life. Surrounded by strangers and staff, his days felt monotonous, devoid of the warmth he had once known. Within a year, he passed away, leaving behind a poignant reminder of the isolation so many elderly face. Mr. Roberts' decision to hire a caregiver came with its challenges. Though his home remained familiar, his sense of independence was stripped away by a caregiver who treated him more like a dependent than a client. His days became regimented, his choices limited, and the freedom he had cherished so fiercely was reduced to a memory. Mr. Thomas's arrangement, too, quickly unraveled. While his sons initially welcomed him, the strains of daily life soon bred resentment. Arguments flared, small grievances ballooned into larger conflicts, and he found himself shuffled between homes, never truly feeling at ease. Despite his best intentions, his presence became a source of tension, a reality that pained him more than he could express. These stories haunt me. They are a stark reminder of the complexities of aging and the fragile balance between love and obligation, freedom and dependence. In each of their choices, I see fragments of my fears, of losing control, of being seen as a burden, of fading into the background of my children's lives. Yet, amidst the heartbreak, there is a clarity that emerges, the determination to live on my terms, no matter how difficult the path may be. Because in the end, dignity isn't something others grant us, it's something we fight to hold on to, even as the world tries to take it away. Reflecting on their stories, it's impossible not to feel a deep ache for the countless elderly individuals who, after decades of tireless work and unimaginable sacrifices, find themselves facing such hollow rewards in their twilight years. When the strength of youth fades, when the patience once abundant wears thin, and the hustle of life slows to a crawl, what meaning do wealth, success, or possessions truly hold? For so many, these later chapters are marked by an overwhelming sense of loneliness, a quiet suffering that pierces the soul, and the bittersweet memories of a time when life felt full of purpose and connection. The poignant words of the late Abigail White, a writer who captured the fragility of human existence with unmatched clarity, echo in these moments. In the end, we all must face a period of weakness, decay, and illness. It is an inescapable truth of life. Rich or poor, young or old, the laws of nature spare no one. Her wisdom strikes at the heart of this universal reality. Yet, nestled within the starkness of her words is a glimmer of hope, a reminder that, while aging is inevitable, our approach to it remains a matter of choice. I find myself inspired and humbled by Abigail's resolve to embrace the end of life with dignity and grace. It is a courage few possess, to welcome life's final act not with fear, but with quiet acceptance. Her philosophy carries a profound lesson for us all. Life, in its fleeting nature, demands to be lived fully while we have the strength to do so. It reminds us to revel in the ordinary miracles of each day, to cherish the moments we can move freely, nurture relationships, and prepare our hearts for the day when our independence wanes. As I grow older, I am increasingly convinced that the key to aging well lies in balance. We must strive to avoid burdening our children with the weight of our needs, while also resisting the urge to cling to them for comfort and validation. Our children should see us not as shadows of who we once were, but as the architects of the lives they now enjoy. We built the foundations of their world with our hands, our sweat, and our dreams. That legacy deserves respect. Yet, as much as we might crave their presence, our needs are often simple. A calm, peaceful space to rest, a few heartfelt words of kindness, and the reassurance that we are remembered and loved. To my children, and all children of aging parents, I urge you to remember the days when we held you close through long, sleepless nights, worried over your smallest troubles, and gave you the best of ourselves, often at the expense of our dreams. In those moments, you were our entire world. Now, as the years have passed, our worlds have grown smaller and more fragile, but our love for you remains boundless and unwavering. Please, treat us gently. The love of a family is a treasure that should never be taken for granted, for it is this love that becomes the light in the dimming days of our lives. Today, we are fortunate to live in an era where modern comforts and conveniences abound. Many families have the resources to care for their aging parents, and some children go to great lengths to express their gratitude. Yet even with the best intentions, mistakes are made. Mistakes that can sow seeds of regret if we are not mindful. There's wisdom in the old saying, reaching 60 is common. Reaching 70 is a blessing. As health inevitably begins to wane, the care our parents need should be guided not by our assumptions, but by their wishes. Too often, I have seen children make decisions for their parents, assuming they know what's best. They arrange living situations, healthcare plans, and daily routines without consulting them, unintentionally stripping them of their autonomy. These decisions, however well-meaning, can leave parents feeling unseen and unheard, eroding their sense of identity. Let us remember that dignity matters at every stage of life, and preserving it should be at the heart of our efforts. I have seen families uproot their parents from the homes they love, bringing them to live in bustling cities filled with conveniences but devoid of the simple joys that once gave their lives meaning. The quiet of the countryside, the familiar faces of neighbors, and the routines of a lifetime are replaced by the unfamiliar and overwhelming. Good intentions are not always enough, and what we think is best may not align with what they truly need. As I reflect on these truths, I hope to share the lessons I've learned so that others may avoid these pitfalls. In our quest to honor and care for those who raised us, let us always remember to listen, to hear their desires, respect their choices, and above all, remind them that their worth is immeasurable. Because at the heart of aging gracefully lies the simplest and most profound need of all, to be loved and respected for who we are, not just for what we once were. I was born into a humble, hard-working family in a small, rural town where life moved slowly, and every small victory was celebrated like a festival. My parents, with their calloused hands and weary smiles, endured countless hardships so that I could have the chance at a future they had only dreamed of. There were days when even necessities were a luxury. A pair of new shoes or a hot meal felt like a gift. But despite the odds, my parents poured every ounce of their strength into ensuring I could go to school. They gave up their comforts, sacrificing so much that it often brought tears to my eyes, even as a child, though I didn't fully understand the depth of their sacrifices until much later. Their resilience became the foundation of my life. I managed to graduate college and land a job in the bustling city. As my financial situation improved, my greatest dream became repaying them for all they had done. I wanted to give them the comfortable life they had never asked for but truly deserved. A life where they no longer had to worry about money or struggle with their health. I was determined to rewrite the narrative of hardship that had defined so much of their lives. For years, I begged my parents to leave the countryside and join me in the city. I envisioned them living in a modern apartment, with access to the best healthcare and the joy of being close to me. It seemed so obvious that city life was better. But each time, they gently refused. My father, with his quiet wisdom, would smile and say, "This is our home. We know every tree, every neighbor. Your mother and I belong here." My mother would nod, adding, "We're too old to start over. What would we do in the city? It's not where we're happy." Though I respected their decision outwardly, deep down, I couldn't let go of the idea that I knew what was best for them. I believed that I could give them something better, a life free from the struggles I associated with the countryside. When my father passed away 6 years ago after a long illness, my worry for my mother deepened. Left alone in her old home, her health began to decline, and I became consumed with fear for her safety. I convinced myself that moving her to the city was not just the best option, it was the only option. With persistent persuasion, I finally convinced my mother to leave the place she had called home for over 70 years. She reluctantly agreed, packing up a lifetime of memories into a few suitcases, and moved into my home in the city. I thought I had done the right thing. I thought I was protecting her, but the reality was far different. At first, I felt a sense of relief, believing I had rescued her from a life of isolation and hardship. But I quickly noticed the light in her eyes dimming. The city, with its towering buildings, endless noise, and unfamiliar faces, overwhelmed her. She missed the simplicity of her old life, the small joys of tending to her garden, chatting with neighbors over tea and watching the sun set behind the hills. These weren't just habits. They were pieces of her soul, fragments of a life she had built with love and comfort. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 2 below to let me know that you are still here with me. My wife encouraged her to explore the local park or meet other seniors in the neighborhood, but my mother resisted. "I don't belong here," she would whisper, her voice heavy with sadness. She was self-conscious about her rural accent, afraid of being judged, and too shy to step out into a world that felt foreign to her. Instead, she spent her days sitting by the window, staring into the distance, longing for the countryside. Her loneliness was palpable, and the realization of what I had done crushed me. I hadn't given her a better life. I had taken away the one she loved. In my desire to repay her sacrifices, I had imposed my version of happiness onto her. I assumed that material comfort could replace the emotional security of her old home. But I was wrong. I see now that everyone has their definition of peace, shaped by years of habits, routines, and relationships. My mother's happiness was rooted in the countryside, in the life she had built with my father. I had disrupted that, pulling her into a world that wasn't hers, and in doing so, I had unintentionally made her loneliness worse. The move also brought out another painful reality. My mother clung tightly to her personal belongings, her modest collection of gold jewelry, small silver trinkets, and her savings book. To her, these weren't just objects. They were symbols of her independence, her security, and her identity. She meticulously wrapped them in layers of cloth, hiding them in different corners of the house, as though guarding the last remnants of her old life. Watching her do this broke my heart because it was a stark reminder of how much she felt she had lost. Looking back, I realized that love isn't about forcing your version of happiness onto someone else. It's about understanding and respecting their choices, even when they differ from your own. If I could go back, I would honor her wish to stay in the countryside, visit her often, and support her in the way she truly needs. The greatest gift I could have given her wasn't a modern life, but the freedom to live the life she loved. One day, while my wife was tidying up, she came across an old, dusty box tucked under my mother's bed. Not thinking much of it, she almost threw it away. But when I opened the box, I was stunned to find my mother's most cherished belongings. Faded photographs, a delicate locket, and a few handwritten letters that must have carried years of memories. Alarmed at how close these treasures had come to being lost, I insisted on taking them for safekeeping. "It's for your good," I told her, confident that I was making the right decision. However, my mother hesitated. She looked at me, a mixture of reluctance and trust in her eyes, and eventually handed over the box. At that moment, I believed I was doing the responsible thing. I thought I was protecting her. I couldn't have been more wrong. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle yet heartbreaking changes in my mother. Her usual warmth and lightness seemed to dim. She began avoiding eye contact, her movements careful, her demeanor stiff. She seemed lost in her thoughts, casting me fleeting glances as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the courage. My wife, ever perceptive, finally pointed out what I had been blind to see. In taking her treasures, I had taken more than objects. I had robbed her of a sense of security and control, two things that become increasingly vital as we age. I felt an overwhelming wave of guilt as I realized my mistake. Those belongings weren't just items. They were pieces of her identity, fragments of her life that gave her comfort and dignity. In my well-meaning attempt to help, I had unintentionally stripped her of something deeply personal. Elderly people, especially when they start to feel vulnerable, cling to the small things that remind them they still have some control over their lives. By removing that box, I had unknowingly crossed a boundary. Determined to make amends, I bought her a small lockbox, something that could be hers and hers alone. I placed her cherished possessions inside, handed her the key, and told her, "This is yours, and no one will ever take it from you again." The transformation was immediate and heartwarming. Her face lit up with a smile I hadn't seen in weeks. She held the little key as if it were a treasure itself. It wasn't just about the items in the box, it was about what they represented. Her autonomy, her history, and her right to safeguard what mattered to her. She seemed to stand a little taller after that, her voice more confident, her laughter more frequent. It was a small gesture, but it restored something much larger. That moment taught me one of the hardest lessons of my life. Our good intentions, however pure, can sometimes cause harm when we fail to consider the feelings and dignity of others. I had acted out of love, but in doing so, I had overlooked her humanity. As children, we often think we know what's best for our aging parents. We forget that they have lived a lifetime of making their own decisions, and the ability to do so, even in small ways, is what keeps their spirit alive. But that lesson was only the beginning. Not long after, my mother's health began to decline. At 75, she was diagnosed with a severe illness. Determined to fight for her, I threw myself into finding the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, and any shred of hope that science could offer. To me, prolonging her life meant giving her more time to find joy, to be with us, and to hold on to the life she had built. I was so consumed by my determination to save her that I ignored the silent pain in her eyes and the resignation in her voice. The treatments began, and they were harsher than I could have ever imagined. Each session drained her strength, leaving her weaker than before. The side effects were brutal, stripping away the independence she valued so much. Once proud and resilient, my mother now lay bedridden, her frail hands trembling as she struggled even to lift a cup. Machines surrounded her, their cold, unrelenting hum a stark reminder of the price we were paying for hope. She couldn't eat without assistance, and her meals were replaced by tubes and fluids. Her eyes, once so full of life, now seemed tired, searching for peace that the treatments refused to grant her. It wasn't until much later that I understood the full weight of my mistake. In my desperation to keep her with us, I had prioritized my fear of losing her over her right to choose how she wanted to live, or how she wanted to let go. My love for her had been blinding, and it wasn't until her quiet suffering became unbearable that I realized the harm I had done. Looking back, I see those moments as painful but profound lessons. Love isn't about control. It's about respect. It's about honoring the wishes of those we care about, even when it's hard for us to let go. My mother taught me that dignity is more precious than time, And sometimes the greatest act of love is to step back and let them decide. One quiet afternoon, I stepped into her hospital room, and the sight of her lying there pierced my heart. She seemed so fragile, so much smaller than I'd ever remembered. Her once strong hands, now thin and frail, reached out to me with surprising strength, gripping mine as though holding on to something far deeper than touch. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and her voice, though faint, carried a resoluteness that shook me to my core. "Child," she whispered, her words trembling with the weight of her resolve, "I don't want to be treated anymore. I want to go home." Time seemed to pause as her words sank in. In that stillness, a profound clarity emerged. I realized with a heavy heart that my desperate efforts to prolong her life had been less about her and more about me. My fear of losing her, my reluctance to let go, my inability to face life without her presence. I had convinced myself that keeping her alive, no matter the cost, was an act of love. But in doing so, I had overlooked what she truly needed: dignity, peace, and the freedom to embrace her final moments on her terms. The realization cut through me like a knife. The treatments, the endless procedures, the sterile hospital environment, all these things I had subjected her to in the name of love, had drained her of joy and stripped away her humanity. How could I have been so blind? That moment forced me to confront a hard truth. Love sometimes means surrendering our desires for the sake of someone else's peace. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. With tears streaming down my face, I made the hardest decision of my life. I took her hand in mine and whispered, "We'll go home." My voice cracked under the weight of those words, but her expression softened. For the first time in weeks, she looked relieved. It wasn't just relief from pain, it was a quiet acceptance, a deep understanding that I had finally heard her. We left the hospital behind and returned to the countryside, to the home she had cherished for so many years. It was a place alive with memories, of laughter, love, and the life she had built. And though her body remained frail, her spirit began to bloom again. She spent her days sitting under the old oak tree, watching the flowers sway gently in the breeze, and soaking in the golden warmth of the sun. Friends and neighbors came by, filling the house with laughter and love. For the first time in months, her eyes sparkled with a glimmer of happiness. Her illness did not disappear, but something within her healed. She rediscovered joy in the simplest of things, listening to the birds' morning songs, breathing in the scent of fresh-cut grass, sharing quiet conversations over tea. She laughed again, truly laughed, and it felt like the music of her soul filling the air. Her final days were not without pain, but they were imbued with a peace that the hospital could never have offered her. I saw it in her eyes, a serenity born of being where she belonged, surrounded by the beauty and love of her home. I realized that letting go of my need to control her fate was the greatest act of love I could give. In allowing her to decide how she wanted to live out her last chapter, I gave her the gift of freedom, and in return, she gave me the gift of a profound, unforgettable lesson. As we sat together one afternoon, the sun casting its warm glow through the window, I held her hand and whispered, "I love you, Mom." Her smile, though faint, held a peace I had not seen in so long. She squeezed my hand, her fingers light but steady, and in that moment, no words were needed. I knew she felt it too. When she passed away, it was in the place she loved most, surrounded by the echoes of a life well lived and the memories she held dear. Though my heart aches with the emptiness of her absence, I find solace in knowing that her final days were spent on her terms, in the way she had always wanted. She taught me that real love is not about holding on, but about letting go. It is about honoring the wishes of those we cherish, even when it breaks our hearts. And so, my journey with my mother taught me one of the most profound lessons about love, loss, and the importance of honoring the wishes of those we hold dear. Her final days were a reminder that life is not measured by its length, but by the depth of peace, love, and dignity we experience. Now, I want to ask you, what have you learned from this story? Has it made you think differently about how we approach life, love, or even the inevitability of saying goodbye? Take a moment to reflect and share one thing you've learned and plan to bring into practice in your own life. We'd love to hear from you, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's create a space where we can all learn from one another and grow together. If you like this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more heartfelt stories and meaningful discussions. Thank you for being here and for being a part of this journey. See you in the next video.